Hey guys, what's up? So, as we all know, English is a West Germanic language within the wider Indo-European language family. Except, when people who aren't into linguistics hear that, they may have a lot of questions and skepticism about how exactly we figured that out. They may say things like, but I thought French made it Romance, or actually, English is 3 languages in a trench coat, which are both terribly ahistorical takes made more for comedians than actual linguists. So today, we're gonna put all that to rest. I'll take y'all through each of the sufficiently known alternative hypotheses about English's language family affiliation in order from most ridiculous pseudoscientific takes to this one actually kind of holds water, we have to look into it, before concluding back at West Germanic and exploring English's closest relatives. Along the way, you'll collaterally learn how language families are determined in general, even outside of English, and especially how they're not. Let's go! So to start, the most extreme wrong idea about English is that it's a Semitic language. Now obviously, this isn't a serious linguistic hypothesis, it's just a story made up by a certain cult in order to justify certain beliefs of theirs. But just for fun, let's pretend this was serious, and analyze what exactly is wrong with it linguistically. First, as will become a theme throughout this video, the main way to test language families is by comparing their grammar, and English grammar is definitely not Semitic. For one, when we look at noun suffixes, they have no relation to each other, not to mention they indicate possession and supplemental nouns completely differently from each other. Verb affixes are also nothing alike. Now, there may be some pushback to this if you're enough of a lumper. For example, you may say that the plural suffixes on nouns in Hebrew look close enough to Germanic languages as we find with the plural suffixes on Hebrew loanwords into Yiddish. That's entirely a happy coincidence, and I'll get a chance to talk about it in depth whenever I get around to a Yiddish language overview. There's also the umlauts plurals, which you could potentially analogize to the broken plurals of Arabic. Similarly, you may also point to the fact that English and the Semitic languages have a fair amount of internal vowel changes on verbs, with English having leftover ablaut and the Semitic languages just being like that. And there's our main problem. Roots in English have vowels that most commonly stay the same at all times. In Semitic languages, vowels even being part of the root is completely out of the question. It's 3 consonants and the vowels indicate the grammar completely regularly. English doesn't do any of that. But there are also the 3 types of vocab that commonly get tested for similarity due to rarely changing or getting borrowed. Pronouns, numerals, and body parts. There are a few of them that look suspiciously similar, but the rest of them definitely do not. And I've still been avoiding the obvious. We have historical records, and those languages never get any closer to each other, especially not within the last 3,000 years, which is what the supporters of Semitic English would like. So yeah, nah, this is just an extremely goofy idea that doesn't deserve a place in linguistics. Now moving into stuff that's not cultish, but still a bit ridiculous, we'll talk about the English Creole hypothesis, the idea that English is not Germanic, but a French-based Creole with a Germanic substrate. Initially, this was just a small part of this video idea, but arguably now it's the main reason I hurried up on making it. I've known about the English Creole hypothesis for a few years, but last year, a YouTuber I won't name made a video with very poor evidence supporting the idea that English is a Creole language beyond a doubt, but made the video look very professional to the untrained eye, despite only ever looking at one side of the issue and completely ignoring anything linguists actually use to determine what is and isn't a Creole. So I realized this video, and especially this section, needed to exist sooner. So as I was saying, in order to accurately assess if English is a Creole, we need to analyze both known Creole languages and English itself to see if English fits the description. So first, what's a Creole language? Basically, first there are pidgin languages. These are languages that no one speaks natively, but they're used between people who can't otherwise communicate when they end up in the same places. The word pidgin comes from the English word business, and trading ports are one place they can arise, with the other one unfortunately being slavery. But then what happens if a community starts to raise their kids speaking a pidgin natively? Then it becomes a Creole language, which means it has hard rules now. Creoles have a superstrate language, also sometimes called the lexifier, as it gives the Creole the vast majority of its vocabulary, which was the language with the political power back during the pidgin phase, like either the colonizers or the slaveholders, depending on the situation, or both. The previous native languages of the speakers are known as the substrates, and they mostly contribute pronunciation and a little bit of grammar, but to nowhere near the extent that the superstrate does. I actually have studied a Creole language before, that being the world's largest, Haitian Creole. Just like the theorists propose for English, Haitian Creole is French-based, but confirmedly, and this is extremely obvious from the moment you lay eyes on it. The vocabulary is overwhelmingly French, over 80% of it, including the most common words in the language. Remember that, it'll come up again later. The grammar comes mostly from the Fon language of West Africa, like the fact that possessive pronouns go after the noun, but those pronouns themselves come from French. In general, it should also be mentioned that Haitian Creole has completely isolating grammar, meaning no words ever inflect for anything, even pronouns for case, which is a near near universal feature of Creole languages. So now that we've seen what a real Creole looks like, does English fit the bill? Nope, not at all. One of the main things that supporters of the English Creole hypothesis point to is the prevalence of French and otherwise Romance vocabulary in English, 58% of it in fact, while only 26% of English vocabulary is Germanic. However, this doesn't actually matter because this is the unweighted vocabulary count. In order to see what the base of the language actually is, we need to prioritize the most common words, and those are almost all Germanic. To show this, according to the Oxford English Corpus, the most frequently used word of Romance origin in English is just, and it's ranked number 57. The only other Romance words in the top 100 are people at 61, use at 83, and the hybrid word because at 94. So of the top 100 words in English, 96.5 of them are Germanic, completely different from the overwhelming Frenchness found in Haitian Creole vocabulary. The vast majority of words coming out of Anglophones' mouths at any given moment are Germanic. When you look at the grammar, it's the same story. While English is more isolating than most of the languages around it, it's not completely isolating, and the degree of fusionality it does have is significant. English nouns inflect for number by adding a suffix, which is sometimes irregular, not something you'll find in Haitian Creole, and verbs inflect for third-person singular in the present, while for the past tense there's an overwhelming amount of irregularity, which was inherited directly from Proto-Germanic. None of this points even remotely in the direction of English being a Creole language, so why do some people support it? Well, I said it wasn't pushed for cultish purposes, but it does tend to be supported for the sake of a certain political ideology. The idea I see being pushed is that the label of Creole language tends to be exclusively given to languages associated with slavery, and this somehow makes the name itself a tool of oppression. So theoretically, by saying that English is a Creole language, you can pull an Uno reverse card and remove stigma from the term, possibly even discrediting the entire concept of a Creole language. First, there's nothing wrong with speaking a Creole language, just like there's nothing wrong with speaking any other minority language. They're languages just like any other. But also, with all the evidence just presented, the name has a specific linguistic meaning, and if you call English a Creole language, you have to extend that label to basically every other language that's ever had contact with Latin or Greek. Speaking of Latin and Greek, next up, and about the same level of ridiculousness as the Creole hypothesis, is an idea that mostly just happens because people don't understand how language families actually work. Some people think that because English borrowed all that Romance vocabulary, it's now a Romance language. This can be debunked along similar lines to the Creole hypothesis, with the main point being that vocabulary is not how linguistic family relations are determined. This would be impossible. Vocabulary gets thrown around between languages like a baseball, with it often being the first indicator of linguistic contact, even before very flexible grammatical structures like word order. If we used it for families, there'd be a lot of changes in the world, like how most Dravidian languages would be Indo-Aryan instead, and almost all of the languages in East and Southeast Asia would be Semitic to some extent. For that matter, basically every language ever is Hellenic now, so you can see this gets out of hand very quickly. This is why grammar is way more important for determining which languages, and by extension which people, split apart from each other in the distant past. It's way less prone to change. And English grammar is completely Germanic. For one, attributive adjectives always go before their nouns, which doesn't hold that much weight since it's syntax, but it's notable that no Romance languages do that, while all Germanic languages do. You may point out that plurals tend to end with S, which is shared with the Western Romance languages, but this is an Indo-European connection, and while rare in the other West Germanic languages, it still exists as a fully Germanic pattern. It's most likely a non-rhoticized version of the art plural found in North Germanic languages. And as for the rest of the grammar, the possessives use an S-clitic, which is completely Germanic, the verb conjugations are all Germanic, and the pronouns, and especially the articles, are 100% Germanic. Not to mention the aforementioned fact that the 56 most used English words are all Germanic, and this matters way more than the overall unweighted corpus. So while some English aristocrats may be ashamed that they don't speak a Romance language, or some non-linguists may put too much emphasis on vocabulary to figure out family relations, this idea is completely impossible. So now, our final incorrect hypothesis is the one that's by far the most reasonable to believe, and I myself was even racking my brain at one point in college trying to figure out why it wouldn't be true. The idea that English is actually a North Germanic language with West Germanic Arial influence instead of the other way around. This idea lies in the very real historical fact that toward the end of Old English in the first millennium AD, the speakers from Eastern England lived alongside Vikings who'd invaded and spoke Old Norse in the region known as the Danelaw. After this period, there was the Norman Conquest in 1066, followed by Middle English and Modern English, as we know. But what if, instead of Middle English developing out of Old English with Old Norse and French influence, Middle English actually came straight from Old Norse with influence from French and Old English? This would make English North Germanic, and it's not that ridiculous to think about because unlike French, which influenced English from the top down, Old Norse was on equal footing with Old English. They were neighbors in England. This is best evidenced by the fact that Old Norse lent some very common words into English like take, egg, and literally any word that starts with sk. In fact, unlike French, Old Norse even definitively effectively gave English a set of pronouns, which is huge. They and all its inflected forms come straight from Old Norse and do not have cognates in the other West Germanic languages. For the rest of the pronouns, you could maybe make a weak case that they somehow come from Old Norse, but not if you look too closely. So speaking of which, where does the North Germanic English hypothesis fall apart? Once again, it's the grammar, although this isn't as immediately obvious as the previous hypotheses. Linguists often run into problems when comparing language families that are too closely related to each other, as the difference between inheritance and borrowing can be very slim. Some parts of English grammar look fairly North Germanic, like the sentence structure. English doesn't do all that verbs to the end stuff from Dutch and German. It also doesn't really do V2 restriction, which is found in every other Germanic language, North and West, although it does still have some of it, mostly in fixed phrases, but it can only happen to auxiliary verbs and conjugations of be. But either way, sentence structure is too mutable to be looked at too seriously for these purposes. You may also point out the fact that English almost completely lacks personal agreement on verbs, something that's also shared more with the continental North Germanic languages than it is with Dutch and German. But that's just the natural direction languages can evolve in, so it doesn't necessarily indicate a close relation, not to mention that the personal agreement that is there is West Germanic, especially when we look at early modern English with the est and eth suffixes. Those match German very well. If English was North Germanic, we'd expect those suffixes, along with the plural suffixes on nouns, to have R in them, because that split happened well before the Danelaw. So after all that speculation, English is still a West Germanic language. The vast majority of the pronouns and all of the articles are West Germanic. While it's not as obvious, the default plural suffix being s is also West Germanic, as if English had gotten the North Germanic version, it'd be r. The possessive s is also Germanic, but widespread throughout both branches. And finally, verb conjugations are completely West Germanic, with the archaic ones from 400 years ago looking very much like the German ones. But speaking of German, there's one final misconception to talk about. When we say that languages belong to a family or branch, and that family happens to take its name from a prominent member, some people will assume that all the languages in that family or branch descend from that modern language. In our case, it's not that uncommon to hear a non-linguist say that English descends from German. That's not at all what happened. English and German are sister languages in the amoeba sense, and both of them in their modern forms descend from Proto-West Germanic, and Proto-Germanic, and Proto-Indo-European beyond that. Proto-West Germanic was neither modern German nor modern English, but also kind of both of them simultaneously, since it would split up into them. Saying English descends from German is essentially the same fallacy as saying that humans descend from chimpanzees. That's not true either. Humans and chimps both descend from a common ancestor that lived around 7 million years ago, but we haven't conclusively matched a species to it yet. So I guess it's just Proto-homininus for now. So hopefully this video has given you a better understanding of how language families are determined. What I want to know from y'all is, if you speak another language, does your language have its own problem with people saying it's part of a language family that it's clearly not? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, I'll see y'all next time.